Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion today. For those of you who are new to our Mason Jazz Monday series, this is a Monday series that we're presenting where we bring in guests who speak about the music business in all formats, performers, entrepreneurs, businessmen, educators, everything. So we are super, super excited today for our guest. This man is incredibly well known in the music industry, and we are thrilled that he could be here today to join us. Harry Schnipper is an author, a producer, lecturer, educator, and presenter of nightly nightclub entertainment. He is the owner and operator of Blues Alley Jazz, which is located in the nation's capital, and it is America's oldest continuously operating jazz supper club. Over the course of the many decades, he has perfected the art of curating his nightclub calendar while simultaneously fulfilling the role of his own nonprofit jazz musician or music education organization. Mr. Schnipper has utilized both platforms to promote a jazz music agenda that includes strategic partnerships with some of the city's most well-known institutions. He is also the curator of the Blues Alley Jazz Youth Orchestra, the Big Band Jam, and the Ella Fitzgerald competition. If everyone makes sure you stay muted throughout this, and please give a warm virtual welcome to Mr. Harry Schnipper.
Thank you, Darden. I want to just start off by saying I am on fire today. If I look like I just got out of the swimming pool, it's because I have. So my goggle eyes might deceive you. But I have not been up all night, contrary to popular opinion. It's interesting, Darden. I don't think we could have had this conversation a year ago. I certainly couldn't have titled the theme of this particular lecture about the post-pandemic society, although I will tell you in a rather tongue-in-cheek way, I've suddenly become the wise old sage of jazz music in America. I've been turned to and asked all kinds of questions, ranging from when will the pandemic be over and when will Blues Alley reopen? And frankly, I've been having a lot of introspection and a lot of creative accomplishments over the past year. If you know, we closed our doors on March 16th, and I did what we conventionally call pivoting. And I pivoted myself from an entertainment presenter to a video producer. And for the past year, I reinvented Blues Alley Jazz in a great many ways. This narrative, by the way, and the reasons why I say all this is because, in a conventional format, we would all be sitting in a class together and you would be asking me questions. Well, frankly, if there's a person out there that knows the future of jazz in a post-pandemic culture, then I would love to talk to them, because a year ago, the landscape looked far different than it does today. And I have assembled a considerable number of notes, and I wanted to say a couple of things before we get underway today. One is that throughout the pandemic, the COVID controlled the narrative. Two, save your questions to the end, because I don't think you're going to know what the questions are right now, simply because it's all new to us and we are navigating this very difficult roadmap individually, and we don't have a collective consciousness in America. If we did, Texas would still be closed, so would Florida and other states across America. I want to say that I've reinvented myself in the past year. That I used to say, like, you've just condensed all my entire quarter century or more worth of skills into a very concise summary, and I appreciate that. I'm going to talk today, though, about something that is very acutely different than what we've historically seen in terms of the way we pattern our programming. And the first thing I realized early on is that, and if anybody wants my notes at the end, just submit your email addresses and I'd be happy to send it out to everyone. I can tell you unequivocally that what has been going on in the real world or the ethereal world for the past year, Darden, has, or Dr. Purcell, is something in which we had heretofore not anticipated. However, if I could, and if this was a real classroom, I'd do what I normally do, which is Does everybody know Blues Alley Jazz? And if they don't, you should definitely take a moment to inspect what we have accomplished over the past 56 years as America's oldest continuously operating jazz supper club. And then the second question is, have you ever been to Blues Alley Jazz? And one of the things I said early on in the pandemic was that, first of all, it was going to last a lot longer than we anticipated. Two, it was going to be a paradigm shift in the way we perceive the music and the entertainment industry. And three, we're not going to return to normal until national touring acts, and that means both music as well as theater and dance, return to the stage. And so I think we've put the cart in front of the horse for the past year, anticipating that, well, once we get the vaccine, everybody's going to just flock into small jazz clubs and sit 10 centimeters away from their neighbor. And that's just simply not going to be the way it is. And so I came up early on in the processes and said, okay, we have to reinvent the way we are recipients of music and entertainment. And people were very, very reticent to adopt the streaming way of life. And it's kind of interesting and shocking in a way, considering we spend so much time on our phones and our tablets and studying the television, and then suddenly we say, oh no, I'm exhausted from watching the screen. It's when I guess you're forced to do, hey Jimmy, was forced to do that, that you have the inability to compartmentalize that in the way we understand the arts and creativity. I'm going to interject one other thing I said early on in the process. I said that we were going to come out in a probably more robust and creative economy in a post-pandemic culture. And that was because what I was witnessing online was this enormous amount of untapped creativity that was looking for a space that they could otherwise express themselves. And I've seen that, and I've talked to a great many artists and audiences, and I think we're going to see a renaissance, first of all. Second of all, the DMV, what we call the District, Maryland, and Virginia, and we don't even know where all our audience is today. And I predicted that the world would become a global audience, a global forum, and it would be a forum which the District, Maryland, and Virginia would be replaced by this global audience. You know, it's funny because as a small jazz club owner, I could only accommodate as many people who could otherwise congregate inside my club. And I said, well, because people are not going to be congregating, let's go and take an entirely outside the box approach. And I told my staff at this time a year ago, we're going to reinvent the way we understand and we receive musical entertainment. So the first thing is that the world became flatter and smaller in the past year. You know, suddenly we were reaching out and watching people all around the world, whether they were banging on pots and pans in New York City, or whether they were assembling in the piazzas in Italy and performing spontaneously. So what I attempted to do, and everybody that I've talked to, whether it's artists or agents, they all thought that we would reemerge from the pandemic much more prematurely, and that streaming was just a stopgap measure in the overall strategy in which we continue to explore the creative arts. So why am I telling you all that? Because there'll be a quiz at the end. No, it's because, you know, you don't know what you don't know. But I happen to have some of the keys to that particular castle. So about 2.5, 3 years ago, I invented this thing called Blues Alley Television. And it was 50 years worth of archival information that was just sitting on platforms that I had never been able to present to audiences in the past. So I said, okay, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is go back over all of those archives, and I'm going to start to release all of the live at Blues Alley artists that we have never been able to present. And so that was something. So I reached out to the larger artistic community, and we started to, because you can actually do all of this stuff. You could actually produce recordings in a pandemic, you know, as opposed to having a live at Blues Alley performance. Or we began to produce broadcasts. And so one of my early projects that I had in the pandemic period, I was approached by the Voice of America. Now, if everybody doesn't know the Voice of America, it's a very important component in our international broadcasting because it includes an enormous amount of jazz and cultural content. Of course, it came under controversy during the previous or the former president's administration. However, what we were attempting to do was go back in time and revisit jazz as world diplomacy. And we put together a project with people from around the world, from everybody from professors and diplomats all the way to Arturo Sandoval and countless other, Igor Boutman out of Moscow. And we created this thing called the Willis Conover Centennial Tribute. And it was so successful because it was the 100th anniversary of Willis Conover's birth, which I think is, well, anyway, so we released that in 2020, and it was so successful, and we were able to come up with so many creative ways to get that message out in so many different time zones that I began to adapt this Blues Alley television, this global audience, and these multiple platforms in a way in which we would be able to broadcast around the world. So everybody was out there trying to create these stopgap measures that included, oh, I'll just stream ad nauseum from my bedroom. And there was a tipping point at which people were like, you know what, that's fine, but it doesn't replace a live performance. So I happen to be a member of the National Press Club in downtown Washington, D.C. And I said, you know what, we're going to broadcast from the most incredible studios in the world. And we are going to put out just one performance a week, every Monday night. And we will concentrate solely on local musicianship. Yes. And so what we did was I went in there and I kind of deal with the National Press Club because they're just like so many other private clubs and organizations. They're shuttered. They don't have any membership activity and they're dying for content. So what I did was I curated my calendar. We launched a broadband broadcasting capability. And all of a sudden, the Blues Alley audience went around the world. And my audience was in London, in Ukraine. They were all over the United States. And I realized this is a twofold opportunity. One is the first fold is that, once again, the world is flatter, it's smaller. And there are places in this world, believe it or not, folks, they don't have regular entertainment scheduling. So the second thing I learned was that this streaming thing, it's here to stay, regardless of whether or not you want it to be, whether it will replace. But guess what? You know, as long as you've got access to Wi-Fi, you have the capability of receiving content. So as I began to develop the programming, what I found was that this disparate audience that was all over the world, we're going to continue to be all over the world and receiving this type of stream. So it had to be quality, because one thing I've learned is if you deviate from the brand, and everybody's got a brand out there, folks, if you deviate from the brand, then what you're going to do is you're going to compromise the quality and people aren't going to come back. So what you want to do is you want to get into the least crowded space, which was Monday nights, and you want to be able to broadcast this. And what I didn't realize at first, because everybody's out there just throwing everything to the wall, using pre-recorded performances, and that's fine. But the thing about jazz is that it has a spontaneity that can't be replicated. And that's the reason why on any given night, on any given week, you can go into a small club and see spontaneous combustion. Why am I telling you that? Because to me, that's the beauty of jazz music, and that's the beauty of improvisation. And suddenly we realized that not only did we have an audience for this product, but we could use that product in perpetuity. We could use it for promotional purposes on the artist platforms. We could use it for public service announcements. We could use it for cross-promotional purposes for other performances once we return to the post-pandemic culture. And so it had its own niche. Why am I telling you all that? Well, because I got this brainy idea back in December that we could take this thing by storm. And when the doubters told me that it couldn't be done, I said, watch me. And so what I did was I created a partnership with the National Cherry Blossom Festival. I curated a Japanese jazz series with 3 internationally renowned jazz pianists. And we pre-recorded the performances. Wait for it, folks. Then we partnered with the Embassy of Japan, the National Press Club, and the Voice of America. Then I partnered with 5 other jazz clubs in the Northeast. There were Scullers in Boston. There was Birdland, if you've heard of that, and Smalls in New York. There was Chris's Jazz in Philly. And there was Keystone Corner in Baltimore. And we came up with this idea that we would all make a contribution in quality content, program it simultaneously on March 20th, which just happened to be the National Cherry Blossom Festival launch. And it would be between 5 and 11 p.m. And my videographer and I set up at the National Press Club. We had 6 screens. We did direct streaming. We did over social media. We did it over radio, and we did it over television simultaneously. We had all 5 continents, 37 countries, and every single state in the United States. Now, if you don't want an audience like that, okay, maybe you're in the wrong industry. But that persuaded me to say, that is the future. Not only is the future, but I was then recruited by the United Nations and the Herbie Hancock Institute to do the similar broadcasting on April 30th. I'm also be doing the Ella Fitzgerald competition and the Big Band Jam. And we are going to recreate, reinvent, and revisit the way we have been producing broadcasting. So I assembled 6 embassies, 18 artists from around the world. We pre-recorded the content. We're editing it as we speak, and we intend to do the same thing over again. And this is going to happen repetitively. You know, new ideas and new technologies can either be embraced or ignored. And I was an early adapter of the internet. And I felt like, you know, what were the goals that I set out to do here? I set out to do to conquer the world, and we did that. Okay, so what we want to do secondarily is expand our audience sizes. I mean, nobody wants to go back to the normal, go into a club, do a performance, and there's nobody there. You know, I've given you a considerable amount of content in a very short period of time, but if you doubt what it is I'm describing to you today, when people say, who are some of the artists and musicians that you've either presented or produced over the past quarter century? You know, I was interviewed recently. I said, it's easier for me to say who I haven't worked with than who I have worked. I've produced broadcast performances with the likes of Dizzy Gillespie, Pat Martino, Wynton Marsalis, Ahmad Jamal, Stanley Turrentine, Eva Cassidy, George Shearing, Chick Corea, Dave Brubeck. I mean, the list is, hopefully some of those names resonate with your audience there, Ms. Dr. Purcell, because frankly, I am very passionate about what it is that I undertake. And as I said earlier about being a senior sage, we've been doing this for so long and so successfully that I think that the pandemic was well, we all know it was a pause, and it was important. I mean, I've been living in a bubble. If you look around me, you're looking at me in my office in Capitol Hill, So Capitol Hill is in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a veritable ghost town. We're not going back to the normal. We've been closed now for a consecutive 13 months, and we will continue to be closed for another 2 months at minimum. And that's because we have a moratorium on all live music. I'm going to jump now to how has the past year changed the way audiences receive music? The fog of the pandemic has been an interesting panacea. It's one in which the two words I've learned over the last year when I talk to people is I forgot. And I've been very proactive. I've been using this doggone thing called the telephone. It's like some people have them. They call them smartphones or iPhones or whatever they call them, but they're used to talk. So I picked up the phone periodically over the past year, and most recently in the last week with artists as diverse as bassist Buster Williams, guitarist Mike Stern, and guitarist Lee Ritenour. I talk to these people because I need to know what it is that they expect to do when and where they return to touring and recording. So I used, this is an interesting sidebar conversation, but I'm going to say the way we receive music, and I'll just list them arbitrarily. Virtual streaming will continue to be a component of production. Listening audiences have become viewer audiences who are passive recipients. Who would have thought the interactive chat room would be a component of the way we send and receive information? Websites, instead of brick and mortar platforms, replaced small, intimate clubs. All of a sudden, there was a whole shoot up of third-party streaming providers. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to meet our streaming needs. Me, not so much so, but there's Stellar and there is Mandolin, and there's so many different diverse platforms. It's up to you to decide how to integrate them into your own business or marketing strategy. I've written articles on these very same subjects, and I really think it's important to stay on point, stay on message, and to develop your own individual brand. All of a sudden, click-through links became a component. It was something that we did to entertain ourselves for the last 2 decades. Now it's been a principal component of getting to the meeting on time, participating in panels, and just about everybody wants to get in on that. But that's the new normal, or the future of the new normal. But more importantly, and this is where you absolutely have to understand the complexities of the entertainment industry. The industry food chain has been disrupted. Let me repeat that. This may be one of the most important points I make today. The industry food chain has been disrupted. So what is the industry food chain? What was it before? And what is it going to be in the future? You have these things called artists or musicians, and they principally put out what is commonly known as music. And that music could be, take any one of a number of ways, downloading, purchasing a compact disc, even vinyl today. Is making a resurgence in terms of it's finally eclipsing compact discs. It's a preferred medium in terms of how we receive quality music product. Then you had the third tier of the food chain, which is called artists, talent art agents, and managers. And those are the folks who act ethereally so that they push the industry forward in terms of having quantitative client lists that are then booked into, wait for it, venue presenters like me. And then we have everybody else who's the audience. And so that's been disrupted. And when people say, what does that mean? That means that a year ago, I made this prediction to talent agents that streaming would be the future, and they ignored me. They said this pandemic will be over in a couple of weeks, and we don't need to worry about it. Okay, can't argue with that, huh? And then I went to the music recording labels, and I said, "So what's up with you guys?" And they said, "We're losing our artist roster, and we are losing our percentage of market share." I said, great, here's what I want to do. I want to stream your artists. I want to use my many platforms to promote your new artist recording releases. We will track them all through web analytics, and we will promote them on my Monday Night Jazz series. And so they said, well, let us get back to you on that. And I said, well, okay. I mean, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to do what it is I'm going to do, regardless of whether or not you're going to do it with me. And so we went forward, and sure enough, the second most prominent recording label signed an exclusivity agreement so that we could promote their artist recording releases during the pandemic, when there was limited access to the larger audience. And we tracked it through web analytics, and we posted promotional videos to complement that. And Mac Avenue Records, and we signed this deal, and now we're taking it to the next level, and we're using my multiple websites as platforms to promote their audiences and artists and audiences and sell their product. So you've got to be creative about the way you interpret this new normal, because we're not going to go backwards. This food chain interruption meant that, one, we're going to redefine the role of the recording label. Two, we're going to redefine the role of the talent agent and manager. And three, you know, I was listening to National Public Radio this morning, and they said that they were making a plea. They were making a plea for everybody to take vaccines. They said, not for you, but for the rest of the world, so that we can develop an international comfort zone. Because if we don't, then people are not going to return to commerce. And we're going to see not only the entire food chain interruption, but this will affect the travel industries, the hospitality industries, all the marketing sectors. So you can either choose to embrace or ignore. But the reality is that what's going on in your little world today is going on across the globe tomorrow. So these are the takeaways that we want to develop inside of this, call it entertainment vacuum. I mean, I know what my audience is today, and I think that I'm kind of checking all the boxes in terms of how it is that you not only adopt, but you adapt to the new norm in a way in which you can continue to promote your career. Because let's face it, I'd be lying to you if I didn't tell you I get 100 unsolicited emails a week from artists and managers saying, can I play at Blues Alley? And that's in a pre-pandemic, a pandemic, and a post-pandemic world that I live in. And so it's a pretty crowded field. But you know, if you can set yourself apart in a way which distinguishes you in terms of your ability to reach your audience, to quantify that audience, then you have a sellable product. In fact, I talked to Lee Ritenour last week, and Lee said to me, he said, man, this download thing really works. He said, I spent years saying to everybody that it didn't make any sense. You know, you had to buy the compact disc. Now I'm realizing I'm making some money. And it took a pandemic to have him realize that. I'm not here to say that the pandemic is good or bad. I haven't left my house pretty much for the past year, and so I'm kind of a captive. But at the same time, I got 105, Dr. Purcell. Um, there has been a pre-pandemic paradigm shift in the entertainment industry, which has completely altered the ways in which we conduct our work and absorb information. But the pandemic only accelerated these forces. You know, everyone is sitting at home, just like me, saying, oh, this pandemic has made it impossible for me to fill in the blank, because I work with people in so many different capacities within the industry. You know, if all you're going to do is want to become a performer, then you're going to have a disciplined roadmap to achieve your goals and objectives. It's interesting because I was just talking to Dr. Purcell. I don't know if all of you attend, no, I guess not all of you attend George Mason University. However, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with two of the GMU graduates over the last 3 years. One is Sarah Moyers, who's now gone on to the American military. And now I'm working with Taisha Estrada, who is similarly involved in my Ella Fitzgerald competition. That's coming up on, wait for it, Saturday, April 24th at the National Press Club. All of this information that I'm disseminating to you today, I know it's got to be a lot of information. And I think the one thing that we know from the pre-pandemic to the pandemic to the post-pandemic culture is that we are being over informationalized. That's my own word. I don't know whether it's right, wrong, or whatever. It's just that I can remember over the last 2 decades when people would say, let me quote you. Where did I get that source? I can't remember where I got it. And I think that only accelerated during the pandemic as people began to turn off the real world and focus solely on the ethereal. And you've got to be able to almost wear blinders. You've got to be able to say, I'm going to stay on point. I'm going to stay on message. And I am going to interact with my audience by way of communicating information. I don't care if you've got the greatest message in the world. If you don't have an audience to receive that message, then you might as well. I mean, you could have all turned me off by now, saying, I don't know what he's talking about. He's crazy. He's lost his mind. I've been vindicated so many times in my lifetime that, frankly, I may be wrong this time, but I really think 15 years ago when I said the internet was really going to take off, we don't have to spend as much money on print advertising, that I actually was onto something, because my staff said that Blues Alley would immediately go out of business if we just turned to e-commerce. Okay. Rethink your priorities, rethink your initiatives. The entertainment industry has been permanently altered in the way we work and the way we absorb this information. And you can collectively and specifically and distinctly focus solely on the message that pertains to you. You don't want to deviate, especially in a pandemic, when the uncertainty, let's say hypothetically, there's 40 people out there in my audience, and all 40 of them want to become performing musicians. And I include the vocalist in that performing musician because their voices are instruments. Let's say hypothetically, all 4 of you want to do that. Where are you going to perform? There's no venues left. Our entire world is completely shut down, all of our operating venues. I'm the last jazz club standing in Washington, D.C. That's one of the reasons I get a plethora of requests to perform, because you're going to be competing with the same amount of space that was previously reserved for a larger stable of musicians. So now you've condensed the world to a point at which you're going to be competing. So let's not just get stuck in a situation in which the world is so mean and cruel. Let's figure out a way that you can spread your wings and creatively fly so that you can otherwise find other avenues that can satisfy your creative need while simultaneously achieving your goals. And by the way, if you haven't been to the Blues Alley Jazz website, in the last year, I posted 3 articles on the business of music that were previously published in Jazz Education magazine. And the real crux of what I'm describing to you is a business plan. Now, I've rewritten my business plan a couple of times in the past year, just because I watched the devolving and evolving way in which we're doing business. But it gives you an opportunity, just like I'm talking to you today, to reinforce that which you are trying to achieve. So if you're using the methods and the skills of yesterday to achieve your goals and imaginations of tomorrow, then you need to rethink which tools you need to get there. And if it's only going to be, I'm going to play at Blues Alley, and then I'm going to play at the Kennedy Center, and then I'm going to go on to Broadway, and then I'm going to be ruling the world. It ain't going to happen that way. And by the way, the world is going to really be slow to reemerge, because we're not all going to open at the same time. So national touring acts are not going to just say, oh yeah, just put me down for Wednesday in Baltimore and Friday in Washington, D.C. No, that ain't going to happen. It's going to change the dynamic, and I don't have time today because it's not part of the conversation of what you're going to be when you grow up. Rethink that. What are you going to be as a person when you grow up? Because we're always growing. Pandemic just made us realize that we needed to grow and become more introspective. By the way, I've got a question here. Number 6, how would you rank Washington, D.C. in terms of its creative economy? I would say in a pre-pandemic world, this is the first time in half a century that I've seen this much musical talent, or this much talent in general, in Washington, D.C. And I include Washington, D.C. and surrounds. I mean, to me, I had that distinct pleasure of having worked with virtually all of the national touring acts. But, you know, for the first time in history, except for my schooling, I've lived in Washington, D.C. all my life. And I can say honestly that I'm seeing a quality of musicianship that I have not seen in a half a century. And I'm just lucky enough to be able to say that. So let me tell you, there is an enormous pool of talent. If you don't know that, or if you don't think that, then all I can say is that, hey, tune into my Monday Night Jazz series, because frankly, we're throwing everything at the wall right now. We're reinventing not only the way people are listening and channeling their musical entertainment, but more importantly, this quality of musicianship continues to resonate outside the greater Washington metropolitan area, because people are watching. So if you have the ability to climb your mountain, if you have the ability to lay down your roadmap, if you have the ability to achieve your creative artistic goals, then you don't have to go very far. In fact, if anything, the pandemic has taught us that you can contain your abilities inside a screen in which you are communicating with others. But you still have to be cognizant of your audience, and you have to be able to expand that audience. That's the number one thing I'm always preaching, which is, how do you expand your audience? Well, there's a lot of ways to do that. Someday I'll talk about marketing and promotion. Today's not the day. So I can say unequivocally that the quality of artistic talent is unsurpassed in Washington, D.C. People have misinterpreted a story that ran about 8 weeks ago when it was announced that Blues Alley may be closing or relocating. And I said to everybody, and believe me, I got emails and interview requests from around the world. I said, didn't you notice that my name wasn't mentioned? I wasn't interviewed or quoted in any of the articles that sprouted up, but they went ahead and ran with it. The realities is that there's opportunities. There's always opportunities. When you look at the pandemic as solely a crisis, you have to understand that there is going to be the first time in another 50 years where the number of venues are going to rise to accommodate the talent. And I have had numerous online conversations with my peers of high school over the past years, reminiscing about all the great clubs that were previously in Washington, D.C. See, what people are unaware of is that there was a fulcrum. There was a supply and demand fulcrum that was already growing. I don't know where everybody lives out there in my audience, but if you drive around the greater Washington metropolitan area or the beltway that surrounds our city, there's all these things called tower cranes, and they're building all of these residential developments, and they're growing at this enormous pace. What the dirty little secret is that the fulcrum for supply and demand is upset. It's part of that food chain, and it's part of that economy in which there's going to have to be an adjustment. And I predicted that prior to the onset of the pandemic. So I think everybody needs to keep focused on this isn't a gloom and doom prognosis. You didn't come here to find out that there is no good news. But at the same time, I want everyone to realize the optimism that I have, because if there's self-doubt, if there's an inability to connect the dots are out there. You just need to be able to focus on yourself and how it is, both mentally, well, and spiritually and physically, I hope, you accomplish those goals. But because you gotta really get, I use this metaphor too many times. You gotta get your ducks in a row before they're gonna quack. And that's something about everything I've described to you today. And so I'm looking at the clock here. I'm going to make a couple of final remarks. They're not final. I'm always open to conversations. What advice would you have to offer the next generation of creatives when tasked with the challenge of finding a place in the post-pandemic economy? And this is a random list. It is in no way the only list, the only talking points. But I'd like to remind you what Dr. Purcell said earlier, which is that I have previously taught, lectured, or written articles on the business of music. I have a little bit of knowledge about what it is I do. In a pre-pandemic world, I produce, promote, or present at least one act, artist, or event somewhere every single day. So with that said, my list is work 24/7. Think big. Read a lot. Don't expect to have a normal life. Have big ears. Construct a business plan. Make history happen. And whatever you do, don't ever look back. So that concludes my 50 minutes worth of elocution.
Harry, thank you so much. That was absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much. Students, if we could give Mr. Schnipper our virtual hand clapping.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, I could still go on, but I just thought the way we usually do this in a normal society is that we have what is called the Q&A period at the conclusion of our conversation.
If anyone does have a question, we've got probably time for maybe one. Hmm.
I have a question. In an oversaturated market of like videos being produced and music being created constantly, how do you find a way to stay original and stay productive, and not kind of get involved in like other people's stuff, or see that, you know, other people are doing things, and then how do you stay like on track and know that what you're doing is right?
I would say, oh, well, let me ask you a question. What are you a student of music? Okay.
Yes, I'm
Okay.
a vocal jazz studies major.
Okay, because I could answer that question in quite a variety of different ways. What I found, and I listen to a lot of music. I listen to a lot of music. I get a lot of unsolicited emails and promotional packages. And that question's been asked ever since time began. You know, I think every generation must think that they invented. I mean, could you imagine what the competition was when the Beatles were putting out one album or two albums a year? I mean, how do you compete with that kind of quality of superior entertainment? I think it's more challenging. I think it's a very busy space today. And I don't get involved with just listening to music. I'm that guy, that rare person who prefers compact discs and vinyl. I like to listen to things at my own pace, not just because it comes in my inbox. And I have to stay on point. The one thing I can say, the two things I can say is one, curate my calendar. I'm not an order taker. I make sure that two, the quality of musicianship is so great at my club and in my products and programming that people will buy a ticket and not even ask who the artist is. So to answer your question, if I was a jazz vocalist, the one thing I think that Dr. Purcell and I agree upon is one way you navigate your way through this road, this very windy road of life. And I found it to be true. That's one reason I started the Ella Fitzgerald Jazz Vocal Competition. Within 24 months, that went from being a small little local competition to an international vocal competition. And I didn't advertise it in South Africa. I didn't advertise it in Berlin, Germany. I didn't advertise it in South America. It just has a way of taking on a virtual presence. You got to find out what are the available tools. You know what I was going to say to you, Dr. Purcell? We should do a resume teaching class and workshop as part of the Ella Fitzgerald competition. That's when I read all of these biographies and profiles that people provide me, I think, what are they trying to tell me? Their entire life story, or not enough? And so I would say the first steps is make sure that your resume, biography, or profile stands out in respect to your competition. And also go online and read these 3 business of music articles. They're very pertinent to your question.
Harry, we've got one other question in the chat. This is coming from Dominic Lewis. He's a senior jazz studies major. And he is saying, you mentioned that you used a number of concurrent mass media outlets throughout the pandemic. Did you find that there were some that were largely more successful than others?
Media outlets?
Yeah, I guess how you distribute your streaming and.
Yeah, but we're unique. Washington, D.C. is an anomaly. Nobody can do what it is that we do in Washington, D.C. elsewhere. And you may say, why is that? Well, one is that we are probably the home of all the biggest cultural institutions in the world. That's like the Smithsonian Institute, the Library of Congress. 2, We're also a diplomatic town and the largest congregation of embassies in the world. 3, if we didn't have the federal government, we'd probably be a college town. 4, we also have the presence of the American military and their armed forces ensembles. And then finally, we have some of the best communications platforms available. So whether it's television, conventional television, or whether or not it's ethereal direct streaming. I don't go through YouTube and Facebook, although I have, because I prefer to direct stream. It's a 30-second delay and it's a much more quality performance. Why am I telling you all this? Because I went with the embassies because they needed programming content for their cultural programming, which they didn't have. I went to the Voice of America, same thing. The reason I chuckled at first was because I thought, wow, last year we also had to deal with a former president and all the crises that would go on every day. So you had to be able to get the noise out of there. You had to be able to stay on point, and you had to move forward with quality partnerships that were trying to achieve the same goal and objective that you are. And that could be done on GMU radio, it can be done in your broadcast studios, it can be done just about anywhere, but you've got to be able to quantitatively grow your audience. I'm doing it with the record labels, I'm doing it with a great many of these. So don't be careful about labeling yourself as a media outlet, because a lot of times, like embassy websites, they're very attractive, and we tracked something like 2,500 streams alone just off the Embassy of Japan. Now, if you could do that on every single embassy and every single platform, that's a very successful partnership.
Harry, I think that's wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. We have thoroughly enjoyed this discussion and we really appreciate your expertise. So
yeah, if anybody has any future questions, I'm very visible and transparent. You go on this thing called bluesalley.com and I can receive all of your respective inquiries. Just don't flood them to me all at once. And I'm also, like I said, if you submit your email addresses, I'm happy to provide you with notes from this particular conversation today.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Look forward to the next time, Darden. Always a pleasure. See you on the 24th.
Okay, bye.